Mom, this is huge. I'm so proud of you. The coffee maker gurgled its last breath as Martha Jensen poured herself a cup. Steam rose in lazy curls, fogging her reading glasses, which hung from a beaded chain around her neck. She squinted out the kitchen window at the maple tree in her backyard, its autumn leaves flaming against a pewter sky. 54 years old. And this was her first morning waking up completely alone in the house she called home for 23 years. To new beginnings, she whispered to no one, raising her mug in a solitary toast. The words felt hollow in the quiet kitchen, echoing against the white cabinets Jacob had insisted they install during their 15th anniversary renovation. How many mornings had they shared in this very spot, passing sections of the newspaper back and forth, commenting on neighborhood gossip or the children's activities? The silence now seemed to mock those memories. Martha ran her finger along a small chip in the countertop, a battle scar from the time Michael had attempted to open a coconut with a hammer at age 12. Jacob had been furious about the damage, but Martha had secretly appreciated the imperfection in their otherwise meticulously maintained space. Now she treasured these small reminders that life had been lived here, messily and fully. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from her daughter Emma. First day of grad school. Wish me luck. Attached was a selfie of Emma grinning nervously outside her apartment in Boston, 3,000 miles away. The autumn Massachusetts sunlight caught in her daughter's auburn hair. Martha's hair, before the gray had started to appear in her early 40s. Emma wore the vintage scarf Martha had given her as a going-away present, a splash of emerald green against her camel coat. Martha typed back quickly, "You'll be amazing. Call me tonight?" She added a heart emoji and 3 exclamation points, perhaps too enthusiastic, but she couldn't help herself. 23 years of motherhood had conditioned her to mask her own anxieties with exuberant support. She hesitated, then added, "Remember to eat something besides ramen." She deleted it before sending. Emma was 23, pursuing a master's in environmental science. She didn't need reminders about proper nutrition anymore. The kitchen felt suddenly too confining. Martha moved to the living room, coffee in hand, and settled on the sofa. Not in her usual corner, but in the middle, a small act of rebellion. For years, Jacob had claimed the left side, Martha the right, with children and pets filling the spaces between. Now she could sit anywhere she pleased. The thought should have been liberating, but instead left her feeling unmoored. Scrolling through her calendar, Martha saw nothing but empty squares for the week ahead. After decades of PTA meetings, soccer games, family dinners, and the endless choreography of managing a household of 4, the blankness was both terrifying and exhilarating. Jacob, her husband, ex-husband now, the divorce finalized just 3 months ago, had moved to Seattle for a fresh start, with his younger girlfriend, Vanessa, an occupational therapist he'd met at a conference. Their son Michael had left for his junior year of college in August. And now Emma was gone too, pursuing her master's degree across the country, her voice animated with excitement during their last call, as she described her thesis project on urban sustainability initiatives. Martha had listened, nodding and asking questions, while silently calculating the time difference and wondering how often they would actually speak. "This is your chance," her sister Laurel had insisted last weekend over wine, her voice slightly too loud in Martha's quiet kitchen. At 58, Laurel had never married, built a successful corporate law career in Chicago, and traveled extensively. She'd always seemed to pity Martha's conventional life choices, even while showing genuine affection for her niece and nephew. "You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. Now it's Martha time." Martha time. The concept felt as foreign as Sanskrit. She'd never been just Martha. She'd been Martha, Mrs. Jensen, Emma and Michael's mom, roommates, teacher. Her identity had been built on relationships and responsibilities to others. The night before, she'd stood in front of her bathroom mirror, studying her reflection as if searching for clues about who this solo version of herself might be. She carried her coffee to the home office, a room that had primarily been Jacob's domain during their marriage. He'd worked late into the evenings there, poring over engineering specifications and drafting proposals. Martha had seldom entered except to deliver coffee or remind him about dinner. Now she claimed the space, painting over the sterile beige with the warm terracotta that made the morning light dance across the walls. Her fingers drifted across the sleek desk she'd ordered online, A purchase that had felt both defiant and terrifying when she clicked complete order at 2 a.m. during a sleepless night. A blank journal lay open, waiting for her thoughts. She bought it on impulse at the bookstore last week, captivated by the handmade paper and leather binding. The first page bore only the date, written in her careful teacher's script. She hadn't known what else to add. 26 years at Westlake Elementary, teaching third graders to multiply and divide, to write in cursive, to be kind to one another. Years measured in school supplies and classroom decorations, in Christmas pageants and end-of-year picnics. She could still recite the names of every student she'd taught, could remember their quirks and talents, the way certain faces would light up with understanding when a difficult concept finally clicked. Now, early retirement stretched before her like an unmapped country. The decision had come after months of soul-searching following Jacob's departure. The classroom that had once energized her had begun to feel like it was draining her instead. The endless administrative meetings, the standardized testing requirements that seemed to multiply each year, the parents who treated her more like a customer service representative than an educator. "I need a change," she told the principal, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Before I become bitter." Principal Sanderson had seemed genuinely saddened, offering platitudes about Martha's impact and suggesting a leave of absence instead. But Martha had known, sometimes you couldn't go back. The retirement party had been mercifully brief. A cake in the teacher's lounge and a canvas tote bag filled with gift cards. A few of her colleagues had seemed uncomfortable, as if her divorce and retirement in the same year hinted at some mental instability they feared might be contagious. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, a familiar Pacific Northwest symphony. Martha closed her eyes, feeling the emptiness of the house press against her skin. She'd been so certain this was what she needed. Space to rediscover herself after decades of being defined primarily as somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's teacher. But now in the quiet she wondered, who was Martha Jensen when she wasn't serving any of those roles? She ran her thumb over the smooth page of the journal. The endless possibility of the blank page had always thrilled her as a teacher, the potential waiting to be realized. Now, facing her own blank page, she felt only the weight of expectation. Her gaze fell on the real estate business card on her desk. Diane Sullivan, an old college friend, had reconnected with Martha after hearing about the divorce through their mutual friend Beth. Diane had stopped by with a bottle of wine and decades worth of catching up. She'd suggested Martha get her license. "You know this town inside and out, you're great with people, and the flexible schedule would give you time to figure out what you really want," Diane had said, gesturing expansively with her wine glass. "Plus, honestly, Marty, you've always had an eye for potential. I've never forgotten how you transformed that dump of an apartment we shared junior year." Martha smiled at the memory. She and Diane had been unlikely roommates, Martha studious and organized, Diane exuberant and spontaneous. They'd lost touch after graduation, with only Christmas cards and the occasional social media comment maintaining the connection. But sitting across from each other that evening, the years had seemed to melt away, their conversation flowing as easily as the wine. Martha picked up her phone and before she could talk herself out of it, dialed Diane's number. "I want to do it," she said when Diane answered. "Sign me up for those classes." "Well, good morning to you too," Diane laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "That's wonderful, Martha. I'll email you all the information today." After hanging up, Martha felt a small flutter of excitement. It was a start. She picked up her pen and finally wrote in the journal, "Today I chose something new." The real estate courses proved more challenging than Martha had anticipated. After 3 decades of teaching multiplication tables, she found herself struggling with amortization schedules and property law. The first evening class, held in a community college classroom not unlike her own at Westlake, left her with a throbbing headache and the suspicion that she had made a terrible mistake. "I understood about 10% of that," she admitted to Diane over coffee the next morning. Her textbook splayed open between them, margins already crowded with question marks. "That's about 9% more than I understood my first day," Diane reassured her, sliding her reading glasses on to peer at Martha's notes. Look, real estate isn't rocket science, but it does have its own language. Give yourself a few weeks. Each evening, she spread her textbooks across the dining room table that had once hosted family meals and holiday gatherings. The formal cherry wood surface, selected by Jacob early in their marriage as an investment piece, now disappeared under sticky notes and highlighters. Some nights, frustration brought her to tears. "I'm too old to be starting over," she complained to Laurel over the phone, wincing as she realized how pathetic she sounded. "Nonsense," Laurel replied briskly. Colonel Sanders was in his 60s when he started Kentucky Fried Chicken. Grandma Moses didn't start painting until she was 78. "I'm not trying to start a fast food empire or become a famous artist," Martha countered, rubbing her temples. "I just want to sell houses without making a fool of myself." "Why did you want to do this anyway?" Laurel asked, her tone softening. "There are easier ways to fill time, you know. Book clubs, volunteer work, wine tasting groups full of other divorcees." Martha considered the question, gazing around her dining room. The children's artwork she'd carefully framed still hung on the walls, chronicling their growth from finger-painting preschoolers to budding high school artists. Michael's abstract expressionist phase. Emma's meticulous botanical studies. "I've spent my whole life helping others build foundations," she said finally. "I guess I want to keep doing that, just in a different way. Helping people find homes where they can create their own memories." "Well," Laurel said after a pause, "that's a better reason than spite." "Spite?" Martha echoed, confused. "Showing Jacob you can thrive without him. Proving something to yourself. The usual divorced woman motivations." Martha laughed despite herself. "Maybe there's a little spite mixed in." "The best motivations usually have a dash of spite," Laurel agreed. "It's like salt in chocolate chip cookies. You don't want too much, but without it, everything tastes flat." After hanging up, Martha returned to her studying with renewed determination. She persisted, rising early to study before class, making flashcards like she used to do for her students. Slowly, the terminology began to make sense, the concepts clicking into place like puzzle pieces. Escrow and earnest money, liens and encumbrances, the difference between condos and co-ops. She found herself enjoying the practical aspects more than she'd expected. The walking tours of properties, learning to evaluate foundations and roofing, understanding neighborhood zoning regulations. Years of helping third graders navigate fractions had given her a patience for breaking complex ideas into manageable pieces. In December, when she passed the state exam, she surprised herself by weeping in her car afterward. Not from relief, but from a fierce pride she hadn't felt in years. She'd done this on her own, pushed through the moments of doubt, absorbed new knowledge. The Martha who had always defined herself through others had created something entirely her own. The first person she called was Emma, who squealed with such genuine excitement that Martha found herself laughing through her tears. "Mom, this is huge!" Emma exclaimed. "I'm so proud of you." "It's just a license," Martha demurred, though she couldn't stop smiling. "I haven't sold anything yet." "But you will," Emma said with the absolute confidence of youth. "You're going to be amazing at this." Later that evening, Martha received a text from Jacob. "Congratulations on passing your exam. Michael mentioned it during our call." "That's quite an accomplishment." She stared at the message, unsure how to feel. Part of her wanted to ignore it entirely. Another part craved the validation. She settled for a simple thank you and turned off her phone, determined not to let thoughts of Jacob intrude on her achievement. Diane welcomed her to the agency with a small office party and a desk by the window. The Sullivan Realty Group occupied the first floor of a converted Victorian in downtown Lakewood, its offices warm and inviting with hardwood floors and tall windows. Martha's desk, positioned near the front bay window, overlooked the town's main street with its mix of boutiques and cafes. "You're going to be wonderful at this," Diane assured Martha, handing her a business card holder with Martha's new cards. "Martha Jensen, Realtor," printed in elegant serif font. "People trust you instantly. That's something you can't teach." Martha ran her finger over the embossed lettering of her name. "I still feel like I'm playing dress-up," she confessed. "Like someone's going to realize I don't belong here." "That's imposter syndrome," Diane said, perching on the edge of Martha's desk. "Everyone gets it. I still do sometimes." And I've been doing this for 15 years. She gestured to the office around them. No one wakes up one day and feels like they've got it all figured out. You just fake it until eventually you realize you're not faking anymore. Martha arranged her new desk with careful precision. A small potted succulent that Emma had sent as a congratulatory gift, a framed photo of Michael at his college orientation, a ceramic pencil cup she'd received from a student years ago. Small touchstones of her past life anchoring her in this new beginning. Her first week consisted mainly of shadowing Diane on showings and learning the office systems. She absorbed everything eagerly, filling a notebook with observations and questions. By Friday, Diane deemed her ready to handle weekend open house duty for one of the agency's listings, a small bungalow in need of updating. Just be yourself, Diane advised as Martha fretted over what to wear. No high-pressure sales tactics. We're not that kind of agency. Sunday afternoon found Martha standing nervously in the kitchen of the bungalow, arranging store-bought cookies on a plate, and adjusting her blazer for the dozenth time. The house smelled faintly of the cinnamon candles she'd lit, a trick Diane had suggested to create a homey atmosphere. The first visitors were a young couple with a toddler, who immediately began opening all the lower kitchen cabinets. Martha felt herself relax. This was familiar territory. She'd spent decades managing rooms full of children while communicating with their parents. He's very thorough in his inspection, she joked to the mother, who looked apologetic. The cabinets have these great soft close hinges. Actually, they're a nice safety feature with little ones. By the end of the afternoon, Martha had guided 8 groups through the property, answering questions about the neighborhood schools, information she knew intimately, the age of the roof, recently replaced, and the possibility of converting the attached garage into additional living space, entirely feasible with proper permits. One middle-aged couple lingered, the wife running her hand appreciatively over the original woodwork. "You've done a lovely job staging this place," she commented. "Oh, I can't take credit for that," Martha replied honestly. "I'm new to the agency. This is actually my first open house." Instead of being put off, the woman seemed charmed by Martha's candor. "Well, you seem like you know what you're talking about. We've been to about a dozen open houses this month, and most agents either hover too much or ignore us completely. You've got a good balance." They exchanged cards before the couple left, the woman promising to be in touch about scheduling a second viewing. Driving home, Martha felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest. She'd been authentic, knowledgeable, and helpful. The same qualities that had made her a good teacher were serving her well in this new role. Martha's first listing was a modest 3-bedroom ranch belonging to the Harrisons, a retiring couple moving to Arizona to be closer to their grandchildren. The husband had been one of Martha's colleagues at Westlake, a 4th-grade teacher with a booming laugh and collection of garish holiday sweaters. "We wouldn't trust our house to anyone else," Gloria Harrison insisted when Martha expressed surprise at being chosen over more experienced agents. "We've known you for 20 years, Martha. You've always been the most honest person at that school." Martha helped them declutter, gently suggesting they pack away family photos and the extensive collection of Southwestern art that might not appeal to all buyers. She arranged for a professional cleaning service and brought in fresh flowers for the open house, selecting hyacinths and tulips that complemented the soft blue walls of the living room. On Sunday morning, she arrived early to open windows and turn on all the lights, creating the bright, airy feeling buyers responded to. She stood nervously in the kitchen as prospective buyers wandered through, reminding herself to give them space while remaining available for questions. She didn't expect Jacob to attend. The familiar cologne reached her before she saw him, the sandalwood and citrus scent she'd bought him every Christmas for 15 years. Martha turned, her heart hammering as he appeared in the doorway of the Harrisons' kitchen, looking both familiar and like a stranger in a sleek charcoal coat she didn't recognize. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sounding strained to her own ears. "Michael mentioned your career change," he said, hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels, a nervous gesture she recognized from countless parent-teacher conferences where he'd felt out of place. "I was curious." Martha was acutely aware of her sensible blazer and the reading glasses perched on her nose. She resisted the urge to touch her hair, which she'd recently cut into a shorter, more modern style that Laurel had insisted took years off her face. Jacob had always preferred her hair long, claiming it softened her features. "Well, now you've seen it," she said, striving for a neutral tone. A young couple entered the kitchen behind Jacob, and Martha straightened her shoulders. "I have other potential buyers to speak with." "Marty," he said, using the nickname she'd once loved. "You look different." "Good different." Something fluttered in her chest. An old reflex, the desire for his approval that had guided so many of her choices over their 25 years together. She tamped it down firmly, reminding herself of the casual way he'd announced his connection with Vanessa, as if discussing a particularly interesting work project rather than the end of their marriage. "Thank you for stopping by, Jacob," she said, professional smile intact as she handed him her business card. "If you know anyone looking to buy in the area, I'd appreciate the referral." After he left, Martha leaned against the kitchen counter, breathing deeply until her pulse steadied. The young couple had moved on to inspect the backyard, unaware of the small drama that had just unfolded. She'd survived the encounter without crumbling. Another small victory. The house sold 3 days later, not to set any records, but enough to earn Martha her first commission check and the confidence to take on more listings. The Harrisons sent her a postcard from their new home in Scottsdale, featuring a cartoon cactus wearing sunglasses. Martha pinned it to the bulletin board above her desk, a reminder that she was helping people transition to new chapters of their lives, just as she was navigating her own. Winter mellowed into early spring, bringing longer days and an awakening energy to the Pacific Northwest. Martha developed a rhythm to her new life. Mornings at the office, afternoons showing properties or preparing listings, evenings for herself. She joined a book club that met at the local library, reconnecting with women she'd known peripherally through school functions, but had never had time to befriend properly. Diane had been right about Martha's knack for real estate. Her years as a teacher had honed her ability to listen carefully to what people were really asking, to read between the lines of stated desires to understand underlying needs. Young families appreciated her knowledge of school districts and child-friendly neighborhoods. Retirees found comfort in her patience and attention to details like single-level living and proximity to medical facilities. Each sale brought not just financial reward, but the satisfaction of having matched people with spaces where they could build their lives. Martha found herself developing a deeper appreciation for the town she'd lived in for decades, seeing it through fresh eyes as she explored neighborhoods and properties. The historic district with its carefully preserved craftsman homes, the new developments on the outskirts with their energy-efficient features, the quirky mid-century subdivisions with their distinctive architectural touches. She began keeping a journal regularly, documenting not just her professional progress but her personal reflections. One evening in late March, she wrote, "I am becoming acquainted with solitude. Not loneliness, that's different, but the quiet companionship of my own thoughts. There are still moments when I reach across the bed out of habit, or turn to share a comment with someone who isn't there. But those moments are growing fewer." Spring brought new energy to Martha's step. Her business was growing slowly but steadily, primarily through word of mouth. Former parents of her students, neighbors, church members, people who trusted her judgment and honesty. She developed a niche working with downsizing retirees and first-time homebuyers, finding satisfaction in matching people with spaces where they could build their lives. Martha was contemplating a rare early evening to herself, perhaps a bath and the new mystery novel waiting on her nightstand, when her phone rang. She answered without checking the caller ID, expecting Diane with a question about a contract they'd been drafting. "Martha Jensen," she said, gathering her things to leave the office. "Mom? It's me." Michael's voice came through, uncharacteristically hesitant. Martha's maternal radar immediately pinged. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he assured her quickly. "But I've been thinking, could I come home for spring break next week? Instead of going to Cabo with the guys?" Martha sank back into her chair, concern mingling with pleasure at the prospect of seeing her son. "Of course you can. Your room is always there for you. But what happened to your trip? You were so excited about it." There was a pause followed by a sigh. I don't really have the money, Michael admitted. And I'd rather save what I do have for summer research opportunities. Plus, I kind of miss home. The last part was mumbled, as if confessing a weakness. Martha smiled to herself, picturing her son, 6 feet tall and fiercely independent since kindergarten, struggling to acknowledge homesickness. I'd love to have you here, she said simply. Do you need me to pick you up from the airport? Nah, I'll rent a car with some friends who live nearby. But Mom? Don't tell Dad, okay? He thinks I'm still going to Mexico. He sent money for it and I used it to pay off some of my credit card. Martha frowned. Jacob had always been generous with money for the children, sometimes excessively so. It had been a point of contention in their parenting. Martha advocating for more financial responsibility, Jacob wanting to provide everything. Michael, I'm not going to lie to your father if it comes up. It won't, he insisted. He's wrapped up in his own stuff anyway. Probably won't even remember I had plans. The bitterness in his tone caught Martha by surprise. Michael had always been close to Jacob, sharing his interest in engineering and outdoor activities. Is everything okay between you two? It's fine, Michael said, too quickly. Look, I gotta go. My next class is starting. I'll text you my flight details, okay? After hanging up, Martha sat quietly, processing the conversation. She'd been so focused on her own adjustment to life after Jacob that she hadn't fully considered how the divorce might be affecting her children's relationship with their father. Emma had always been more open with her feelings, calling Martha in tears after the separation announcement. But Michael had remained stoic, assuring both parents he understood and just wanted them to be happy. Perhaps that understanding had its limits. Michael arrived the following Tuesday evening, dropping his duffel bag in the front hall with the same casual disregard for household order that had characterized his teenage years. Martha hugged him tightly, noting the new leanness to his frame and the shadows under his eyes. Finals week looks rough, she commented, leading him to the kitchen where she'd prepared his favorite meal, lasagna with garlic bread. A tradition since his middle school growth spurt had turned him into a perpetually hungry organism. It's not that bad, he shrugged. But the way he fell upon the food suggested otherwise. That night, lying in bed, Martha heard the familiar sound of Michael moving around the house, the creak of the refrigerator opening, the soft thud of the living room sofa as he settled in with a late-night snack. Some rhythms remained unchanged, even as everything else shifted. The next morning, she found him examining her real estate materials spread across the dining table, his expression curious. So you really did it, he said, looking up at her. Changed careers and everything. I did, she confirmed, starting the coffee maker. Does that surprise you? Michael shrugged, flipping through one of her listing presentations. Kind of. You were always so into teaching. I guess I thought you'd do that forever. Martha considered how to explain the complex web of reasons behind her decision, the need for change after Jacob left, the growing dissatisfaction with educational bureaucracy, the desire to prove something to herself. Sometimes you don't realize you're ready for a change until you're forced to make one, she said finally. Michael nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. What about you? Martha asked carefully, sensing an opening. Are you still happy with engineering? Or are you considering other paths? His expression clouded briefly. Dad would freak if I switched majors now. Your father doesn't get a vote, Martha said, more sharply than she'd intended. She softened her tone. Michael, you're 21. Your education and career choices are yours to make. He picked at a loose thread on his sweatshirt sleeve, not meeting her eyes. I've been thinking about environmental engineering instead of mechanical. There's this professor doing amazing work with water purification systems for developing countries. The pay would be way less than what Dad makes designing luxury buildings, but it would matter more, Martha finished for him, recognizing the idealism that had always been a core part of her son's character, sometimes obscured by his desire to please his father. Yeah, he said, looking relieved to be understood. Exactly. Martha handed him a mug of coffee, prepared the way he liked it. Too much sugar, a splash of milk. For what it's worth, I think you'd be brilliant at that. And I think deep down your father would be proud too. He just might need time to adjust his expectations. Michael took a long sip of coffee, seemingly weighing her words. Maybe. Anyway, enough about school. Show me what you're working on, real estate lady. The rest of the week passed in a comfortable rhythm. Michael helped Martha host an open house, charming potential buyers with his knowledge of the neighborhood and genuine enthusiasm for the property's features. He accompanied her to the office one day, impressing Diane with his tech skills when he fixed a persistent issue with the agency's database. "Your son is a delight," Diane told Martha afterward. "And not just because he saved us a fortune in IT consultant fees." On Michael's last evening home, they sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the spring sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold. The maple tree was budding, tiny leaves unfurling with the promise of summer's fullness to come. "I'm thinking of not going back to Dad's for the summer," Michael said abruptly. "I got offered a research position at school. It doesn't pay much, but I could stay in my apartment." Martha studied her son's profile, so like Jacob's but with a gentleness around the mouth that was distinctly his own. "Have you told him yet?" "No," Michael admitted. "He's been talking for months about all these hikes we're going to do, concerts in Seattle, introducing me to all his new friends." He made a face. "Including Vanessa." "You don't like her?" Martha asked, keeping her tone carefully neutral. "I don't know her," Michael replied. "And I don't really want to. She texts me sometimes trying to be buddy-buddy. It's weird." Martha nodded, understanding his discomfort. "You know, your father's choices are his own. They weren't about you or Emma or even me, really. They were about him. But they affected all of us," Michael pointed out, a flash of anger coloring his voice. "He just left. And now he wants everything to be normal, like we're all supposed to adjust to his new life, while he barely acknowledges that he blew up our old one." Martha reached over to squeeze his hand, her heart aching for her son's pain. "I know it's not fair, and you're allowed to be angry, but don't let that anger make your decisions for you. If you want the research position, take it because it's the right opportunity for you, not because you want to punish your dad." Michael was quiet for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. "When did you get so wise?" he asked finally, a small smile breaking through his serious expression. "Oh, I've always been wise," Martha replied lightly. "It just took me 54 years to start listening to myself." On a mild April evening, she was leaving the office when her phone rang. Emma's face appeared on the screen. Her daughter caught mid-laugh in the photo Martha had assigned to her contact. "Mom, I need advice," Emma said without preamble. "And promise you won't freak out." Martha's heart clenched. 25 years of parenting had conditioned her to expect the worst whenever a conversation began this way. She paused in the parking lot, keys in hand, mentally preparing herself. "Please don't be pregnant. Please don't be dropping out. Please don't be moving in with some boy I've never met." "I'm listening," she said, sliding into her car and shutting the door, creating a private space for whatever might come. "Professor Alvarez, you remember I told you about him? My thesis advisor." Emma's words tumbled out in the rushed pattern that had characterized her speech since childhood, when her thoughts always seemed to race ahead of her ability to articulate them. "He's asked me to join his research team in Ecuador for the summer. It's an amazing opportunity, studying indigenous agricultural practices and sustainability. But I'd be gone for 3 months." Martha closed her eyes, relief washing through her, followed immediately by concern. She envisioned the lush Amazon rainforest, so distant from the safe suburban world where she'd raised her daughter. Emma, with her pale skin that burned at the mere thought of sun exposure. Emma, who had once called home in tears from a weekend camping trip because she'd encountered a particularly large spider. But also Emma, who had organized a school-wide recycling program at 16. Emma, who had lobbied the city council to ban single-use plastics with such passion and well-researched arguments that they'd actually listened. Emma, whose determination had always outweighed her fears when something mattered to her. "That sounds incredible, honey," she said carefully, "but also remote. Would you have regular communication? Safety protocols?" "Mom," Emma sighed, the familiar exasperation in her voice. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking if you think I should prioritize this opportunity or stay for my summer teaching assistantship." Both would be good for different reasons. Martha felt the subtle shift between them. Her daughter wasn't seeking approval, but genuine insight. She was being consulted as a person with wisdom to offer, not just as a mother. The realization was both poignant and gratifying. Take the research position, Martha said decisively. Teaching opportunities will always be there. Adventures like this come along rarely. Really? Emma sounded surprised. I thought you'd try to talk me out of it. The old me might have, Martha admitted, starting her car. But I'm learning something about taking chances myself these days. Dad said I should stay and teach, Emma continued. He said the jungle is dangerous and the teaching position would look better on my resume. Martha bit back her immediate response, that Jacob had always been more concerned with appearances and conventional definitions of success than with experiences that shaped character. Your father wants what's best for you, she said diplomatically. We just might have different ideas about what that is. So you really think I should go? Emma pressed. Even though it's like actual rainforest with bugs and snakes and stuff? Martha laughed. Yes, especially because of that. You've always cared about environmental conservation. Now you get to see firsthand what you're working to protect. Just promise me you'll get all the recommended vaccines and take ridiculous amounts of insect repellent. Already looking into shots, Emma assured her. And they provide these special jungle uniforms that cover everything. Not exactly high fashion, but better than malaria. After finishing the call, Martha sat in her parked car for a moment, contemplating the conversation. 6 months ago, she would have responded with a list of concerns and cautionary tales. She would have spent the next 3 months worrying about parasites and kidnappers and all manner of catastrophes. Now she felt a vicarious thrill at her daughter's boldness. Had her own recent life changes made her more open to risk, more appreciative of seizing opportunities? Or had she always had this capacity within her, merely dormant during the years when security and stability had been her primary concerns? Perhaps they were both evolving, mother and daughter, in parallel though different journeys. As spring deepened into early summer, Martha found herself busier than ever. The real estate market heated up with the weather, families eager to move before the new school year began. She developed a rhythm to her days, morning coffee on the back porch, watching birds flit through the maple tree. Days filled with showings, paperwork, and client meetings. Evenings for herself, sometimes with friends, sometimes in quiet solitude. She'd begun taking regular hikes on weekends, exploring the network of trails that surrounded Lakewood. These walks had started as a conscious effort to fill empty hours, but had evolved into something she genuinely anticipated. There was something meditative about moving through the forest alone, listening to the rustle of leaves and distant bird calls, feeling her body grow stronger with each passing week. It was on one such hike in late May that Martha encountered Alan Reeves struggling with a trail map at a junction. She recognized him immediately, the father of a former student, a quiet girl named Sophie who had blossomed in Martha's third-grade classroom nearly a decade ago. Mr. Reeves, she called, approaching him. It's Martha Jensen, Sophie's teacher from Westlake. He looked up, surprise giving way to recognition. Mrs. Jensen, of course, though I guess I should drop the Mrs. Now, Sophie mentioned you'd left teaching. Martha is fine, she said, feeling oddly self-conscious in her hiking gear. A far cry from the professional attire he would remember her wearing at parent-teacher conferences. And yes, I made a career change. Real estate now. That explains the sign I saw last week, he said, gesturing vaguely in the direction of town. Jensen Realty, right? Sullivan Realty Group, she corrected. I work with Diane Sullivan's agency. Ah. He folded the map awkwardly, seeming unsure how to continue the conversation. Martha noticed the wedding band missing from his left hand. She remembered it clearly from their previous meetings, a distinctive hammered gold ring he'd often twisted while discussing Sophie's progress. Are you headed toward Lookout Point? She asked, filling the silence. It's beautiful this time of year. The rhododendrons are in bloom along the Eastern Trail. That was the plan, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. If I could figure out which trail is the eastern one. I'm headed that way myself, Martha offered. You're welcome to join me. The invitation surprised them both. Martha had grown protective of her solitary hikes, treasuring the quiet companionship of her own thoughts. Yet something about Alan's slightly lost expression, not just with the map, but in a larger sense, resonated with her. "I'd appreciate that," he said. "Sophie always handled the navigation on our hikes. Now that she's away at college." He trailed off with a shrug. As they walked, conversation came easier than Martha had expected. Alan was a civil engineer specializing in sustainable infrastructure, currently consulting on the town's new water treatment facility. He was knowledgeable about the local ecosystem, pointing out native plants and explaining their role in preventing erosion along the trail. "Sophie's studying environmental science," he mentioned as they paused to admire a particularly dramatic vista of the valley below. "Following in Emma's footsteps, actually. Your daughter's work on the plastic ban made quite an impression on her." Martha smiled, proud that Emma's passion had inspired others. They're both in the right field for making a difference these days. Emma's actually heading to Ecuador soon for a research project. "That's impressive," Alan said. "Sophie's doing an internship with the Forest Service this summer. Much less exotic, but she's excited." He hesitated, then added, "It's been good to have these shared interests since the divorce. Gives us something to talk about beyond the awkward logistics of holidays and tuition payments." Martha nodded, understanding completely. "How long has it been for you?" she asked. 3 years this August," he replied. "It was Sophie's senior year of high school. Not ideal timing, but is there ever a good time?" "Probably not," Martha agreed. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the path narrowing through a stand of old-growth pines. "Does it get easier?" she found herself asking. "Year 3 versus year 1? Alan considered the question seriously. "Different more than easier," he said finally. "The shock wears off. The routines become your own instead of pale imitations of what you had before. You stop reaching for the phone to share every little thing." He glanced at her. "How long for you?" 1 year since he left, though the divorce was only finalized 8 months ago," Martha replied. "The firsts are the hardest," he offered. "First birthday alone, first holiday season. After that, especially not with people I barely know." "Something about forests," Martha suggested. "They make good listeners, so maybe that quality rubs off on anyone who spends time in them." He laughed, a warm sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Maybe so." As they headed back down the trail, Alan asked if she might be interested in trying the Northern Trail Network the following weekend. "They have a spectacular meadow that should be covered in wildflowers by now," he added. "Though I understand completely if you prefer your solitude. These hikes have probably become precious alone time." Martha hesitated. There was something comforting about Alan's company. The easy conversation, the shared understanding of life's unexpected turns. Yet she was still finding her way as just Martha, not one half of a couple. "Let's say tentatively yes," she decided. "If something comes up with work, I'll let you know." They exchanged phone numbers before parting ways at the trailhead, the interaction feeling refreshingly straightforward, neither laden with expectations nor complicated by past history. That night, Martha mentioned the encounter to Laurel during their weekly video call. "Like a date?" her sister asked immediately, eyebrows raised. "No," Martha insisted, though the question gave her pause. "Just a hiking companion. He's been divorced longer than me. He understands the terrain." "Interesting choice of words," Laurel remarked, sipping her wine. "The terrain. You know what I mean," Martha sighed. "It's nice to talk to someone who's already navigated this particular path. And it doesn't hurt that he's reasonably attractive, based on your description," Laurel added. "Distinguished salt and pepper hair, laughing eyes, knowledgeable about native plants. Sounds like catnip for formerly married elementary school teachers." "Stop it," Martha protested, but she was laughing. "We're just hiking." "For now," Laurel said with a knowing smile. "But I'm glad, Marty. You deserve some uncomplicated enjoyment of male company after Jacob's midlife crisis extravaganza." Martha rolled her eyes at her sister's characterization but didn't argue. The truth was, she had enjoyed Alan's company in a way that felt different from her other post-divorce social interactions. Not romantic necessarily, but companionable. Present. There had been no need to explain herself or catalog her recent life changes. They had simply walked together, sharing observations and memories without judgment. The following Sunday found them exploring the Northern Trail as planned. This time, Martha packed a proper picnic: chicken salad sandwiches, fresh strawberries, homemade lemonade in a thermos. Alan brought a field guide to wildflowers and a keen eye for spotting the season's first butterflies. Their hikes became a regular weekend fixture through June and into July. Sometimes they talked extensively about their children, their work, books they'd read, changes in the community. Other times they walked in comfortable silence, each lost in private thoughts while sharing the simple act of putting one foot in front of another. Martha found herself looking forward to these outings with an anticipation that both pleased and unsettled her. She caught herself spending extra time selecting hiking clothes, applying sunscreen more carefully than necessary, tucking a tin of homemade cookies or slices of seasonal fruit into her backpack to share at their inevitable rest stops. "You like him," Emma declared matter-of-factly during a video call from Ecuador. Her face pixelated but her intuition crystal clear despite the spotty internet connection. "We're friends," Martha insisted, feeling oddly defensive. "It's nice to have a hiking partner." "Mom," Emma said with a particular inflection that conveyed her millennial exasperation with boomer obliviousness. "You mentioned him in our last 3 calls. You're planning hikes around his schedule. You bake those complicated cranberry orange scones you used to only make for Christmas." Martha opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. Had she really mentioned Alan that often? The scones had been a practical choice. The dried cranberries needed using up, and orange zest was a natural companion, but she couldn't deny the extra care she'd taken packaging them. "I'm not ready for anything complicated," she said finally. "Who said anything about complicated?" Emma replied, her image freezing briefly before jerking back to life. "But it wouldn't be the worst thing if you enjoyed someone's company as more than a hiking partner, you know?" The conversation lingered in Martha's mind as July stretched toward August, the Pacific Northwest days long and golden, the forests fragrant with sun-baked pine. She and Alan had expanded their explorations beyond the immediate area, driving to trailheads further afield, sometimes spending full days outdoors. They'd developed comfortable routines. He always brought the coffee, she always brought lunch. He identified birds and plants. She remembered the sunscreen and first aid kit. On a particularly perfect Saturday, they hiked to a secluded lake nestled in a mountain valley. The water was clear and cool, reflecting the surrounding peaks like a mirror. Without discussion, they both removed their boots and socks, rolling up their pants to wade in the shallows. "I used to bring Sophie here when she was little," Alan said, watching ripples spread from his footsteps. "She'd spend hours looking for tadpoles and water skippers." "Michael loved catching minnows in jars," Martha replied, smiling at the memory. "He'd study them intently, then insist on releasing them in exactly the same spot he'd found them." Alan looked over at her, squinting slightly against the sun. "I've talked more about Sophie with you than with anyone else since the divorce," he admitted. "Caroline, my ex-wife, she doesn't really want to hear about the camping trips or science projects. Those were my things with Sophie, not hers." Martha nodded, understanding the peculiar divisions that happened after a marriage ended. The unconscious partitioning of memories and relationships. "Jacob was the one who taught both kids to ski," she offered. "I never got beyond the bunny slope myself. Now skiing belongs to him in the divorce geography. I get hiking and beach trips." "Divorce geography," Alan repeated thoughtfully. "That's exactly it. The remapping of your life and memories." He splashed water absently with his toes. "Sophie's getting her mother's determined chin and my inability to carry a tune. She's a living Venn diagram of our marriage, even though the marriage itself is gone." They settled on a sun-warmed rock for lunch, shoulders almost touching as they gazed out over the lake. Alan had brought fresh cherries, dark and sweet, their season fleeting. Martha found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her. The subtle cedar notes of his soap, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the careful way he gathered cherry pits in a paper napkin rather than discarding them in the wilderness. "I've been thinking," he said suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. "The Symphony in the Park series starts next weekend. They're doing an evening of film scores, John Williams, Hans Zimmer, that sort of thing. Would you be interested in going? With me, I mean. As not a hiking excursion." The question hovered between them, laden with possibility. Martha felt a fluttering in her chest that had nothing to do with the altitude. "I'd like that," she said simply. The moment shifted something in their relationship. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. Their parting at the trailhead included a brief hug, a natural gesture that nonetheless felt significant. Driving home, Martha found herself smiling at nothing in particular, a lightness in her spirit that had been absent for a very long time. That evening, her phone rang as she was preparing a simple dinner of grilled vegetables and quinoa, one of the healthy recipes she'd adopted since cooking for just herself. "Martha? It's Jacob." She nearly dropped the knife she was using to slice zucchini, his voice so unexpected it seemed to materialize in her kitchen, rather than just through the phone speaker. "Jacob," she replied, setting down the knife carefully. "Is everything all right?" Fine, he assured her quickly. "Just checking in. Michael mentioned you've been spending time with someone. A fellow teacher." Martha blinked, processing both the information that Michael had been discussing her personal life with Jacob and the oddly proprietary tone in her ex-husband's voice. "Alan Reeves," she corrected. "Civil engineer. His daughter was one of my students years ago. We've been hiking together." She hesitated, then added, "And yes, we're going to the symphony next weekend." "Oh." Jacob seemed momentarily at a loss. "Well, that's good. I just wanted to make sure you were doing well." "I'm doing very well," Martha replied, surprised to find it was entirely true. "How are you and Vanessa?" The question came out naturally, without the bitter edge that would have accompanied it even a few months earlier. "We're fine," he said quickly. "Busy with work. Vanessa's opening her own practice." "That sounds exciting for her," Martha offered genuinely. An awkward silence stretched between them. "Well," Jacob said finally, "I should let you go. I just wanted to check in." After hanging up, Martha stood in her kitchen, knife poised over the abandoned zucchini, processing the strange interaction. She'd spent months imagining a conversation with Jacob that didn't leave her feeling diminished, and when it finally happened, it was because she'd been too surprised and too content with her current circumstances to feel wounded by him. Progress, she decided, resuming her dinner preparations. Not linear, not always recognizable in the moment, but progress nonetheless. The symphony in the park was held in the sprawling grounds of the local community college. The crowd spread across the grassy amphitheater with blankets, folding chairs, and elaborate picnic setups. Alan arrived at Martha's house promptly at 6, bearing a bottle of local wine and a bashful expression that reminded her of parent-teacher conferences from years past. "I wasn't sure if we should meet here or there," he explained as she invited him in. This seemed, I don't know, more intentional. Martha understood exactly what he meant. Meeting at the park would have maintained the casual nature of their relationship. Picking her up at home signaled something more defined. "Intentional is good," she assured him, retrieving the picnic basket she'd prepared. "I appreciate clarity these days." The evening unfolded with a pleasant ease. Alan had reserved space near the front with the perfect view of the orchestra. Martha had packed a spread that drew envious glances from neighboring concertgoers: artisanal cheeses, crusty bread, grapes, and chocolate-dipped strawberries. They shared observations about the music, occasional brushes of hands as they reached for the same piece of cheese, and a gentle familiarity that felt both new and somehow familiar. During the Star Wars medley, Alan's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture so simple yet profound that Martha felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes. How long had it been since she'd experienced this basic human connection? The uncomplicated pleasure of having her hand held by someone who chose to be beside her? As the symphony built to its finale with the triumphant strains of Superman, the summer night illuminated by 1,000 tiny lights strung through the surrounding trees, Martha felt a sense of possibility unfurl within her, not just regarding Alan but about life itself. The path forward might not be what she'd envisioned for herself all those years ago, but it contained its own particular beauty. Walking back to the parking lot, still hand in hand, Alan asked, "Too soon for a second date? There's an exhibit at the art museum I've been wanting to see. Pacific Northwest Landscapes Through the Centuries." "Not too soon," Martha replied, surprising herself with her certainty. The museum date led to dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. where they lingered over pasta and conversation until the staff began stacking chairs around them. That evening ended with a kiss, gentle and brief, but unambiguous in its intent, on Martha's front porch, leaving her feeling simultaneously 17 and precisely her age. With all the wisdom and scars that entailed, they settled into a rhythm of seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week, still hiking on weekends, but now also sharing meals, attending community events, and gradually meeting each other's friends. Martha introduced Alan to Diane and the book club women. He introduced her to his colleagues and a group of amateur photographers he'd met through a community education course. In late August, Martha received a text from Emma. "Survived the jungle. Flying home next week. Would love to see you before heading back to Boston. Also, I want to meet this Alan person I've been hearing so much about." Martha hadn't realized how much she'd missed her daughter until she spotted her coming through the airport security gate, tanned and lean from her months in the field, her auburn hair now streaked with natural highlights from the equatorial sun. They embraced for a long moment, Martha breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter beneath the lingering notes of travel. "You look amazing," Martha said, stepping back to take in Emma's transformation. "Ecuador clearly agreed with you. Life-changing," Emma confirmed as they headed toward baggage claim. "I have so much to tell you. And photos, hundreds of photos." "I want to hear everything," Martha assured her. "I've scheduled very little work this week, so we can have proper time together." Emma glanced at her mother with an appraising eye. "You look different," she observed. "Good different. Is it the hair?" Martha had recently had her shoulder-length bob trimmed into a more stylish, layered cut that emphasized her cheekbones and minimized the softening line of her jaw. "Maybe partly," Martha admitted, self-consciously touching the ends of her hair. "Or maybe it's the glow of new romance?" Emma suggested with a teasing smile. Martha felt color rise in her cheeks. "It's not quite. We're taking things slowly." "Mom," Emma said, slinging her arm around Martha's shoulders as they waited for her luggage. "After 2 decades of marriage followed by Dad's midlife crisis spectacular, you deserve some happiness. Don't overthink it." That evening, as they shared takeout Thai food in Martha's kitchen, Emma regaled her with tales of the research team's adventures, the torrential rains that had flooded their base camp, the local children who had adopted the scientists as honorary family members, the ancient agricultural techniques they were documenting that might hold solutions for modern sustainability challenges. "Professor Alvarez thinks there's at least 3 journal articles from the data we collected," Emma said, expertly wielding chopsticks. "He's already talking about a return trip next summer. Maybe extending to Peru as well." "That's wonderful, honey," Martha replied, genuinely proud of her daughter's passion and accomplishments. "And what about teaching? Will you still be a TA this fall?" Emma nodded. "For the introductory environmental science course. It's a good way to share what we learned with undergrads who might want to join future expeditions." She poked at a piece of tofu thoughtfully. "Actually, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about." Martha recognized her daughter's expression, the same focused look she'd worn as a child when building particularly complex Lego structures or organizing her rock collection by geological type. "I've been accepted to a doctoral program," Emma announced. "Starting next fall. Professor Alvarez will be my advisor." "Emma, that's fantastic," Martha exclaimed, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "I knew you were considering it, but I didn't realize you'd already applied." "I wasn't going to," Emma admitted. "I thought I'd work in the field for a few years first. But after Ecuador, I realized how much more I could contribute with advanced research credentials." She hesitated. "But it means at least 5 more years in Boston. Maybe longer if postdoc opportunities come up." Martha felt the familiar maternal pang, pride mingled with the selfish wish to have her child closer. "Boston is where the opportunities are," she said firmly. "And planes fly in both directions. We'll make it work." Emma studied her mother's face. "You're really okay with this? Because I know when I first left for undergrad, you had a hard time with the distance." "That was different," Martha replied, surprised by her own certainty. "I was still thinking of myself primarily as your mother then, and Michael's mother, and Jacob's wife. My identity was wrapped up in those roles." She smiled. "I've had to figure out who Martha is outside of those relationships. It turns out she's pretty capable of navigating change." 2 days later, Martha introduced Emma to Alan over dinner at his home, a modern timber frame house he'd designed himself, perched on a hillside overlooking the town. Emma charmed him immediately with her genuine interest in sustainable architecture and thoughtful questions about his work on the water treatment facility. "Your mom tells me you're headed for a PhD program," Alan said as they enjoyed dessert on his expansive deck, the summer evening still light enough to showcase the dramatic vista. "That's impressive commitment. I'm passionate about finding practical applications for traditional ecological knowledge," Emma explained, her face animated. "Indigenous communities have managed to live sustainably for centuries in environments we're rapidly destroying. There's so much to learn from their approaches." Martha watched her daughter and Alan discuss watershed management and erosion control, struck by how easy their interaction felt, how natural. When Alan excused himself to make coffee, Emma turned to her mother with raised eyebrows. "I approve," she declared in a stage whisper. "He seems smart, and he clearly thinks you hung the moon, based on how he looks at you when you're talking." "Emma," Martha protested, feeling her cheeks warm. "Just saying," Emma replied with a grin. "Also, the man built this house himself. That's impressive DIY energy right there." Later that week, Michael flew in for 2 days before heading back to school, completing the brief family reunion. Unlike Emma, he seemed reserved about meeting Alan, maintaining a polite but careful distance during their lunch together. "He seems fine," was Michael's only comment when Martha asked his opinion afterward. "As long as you're happy, Mom." Martha sensed there was more beneath his non-committal response, but decided not to press. Michael had always processed emotional changes more slowly than his sister, preferring to observe and evaluate before forming conclusions. She remembered how, as a child, he would watch new playground equipment being installed for days before finally trying it himself, while Emma would be scrambling up the tallest slide before the construction crew had fully departed. As summer transitioned to fall, Martha found herself settling into a new pattern of life, one that included regular date nights with Alan, weekend hikes, and occasional overnight trips to explore farther-flung trails or attend events in Seattle or Portland. They moved forward with a deliberate pace that respected their mutual histories and complexities. "I'm not looking to replace Caroline or erase our past," Alan told her one evening, as they sat by the fire pit in his backyard, watching sparks rise toward the star-scattered sky. "Sophie will always be the center of my world, and our history together, good and difficult, made me who I am." "I feel the same about Jacob and our marriage," Martha replied, grateful for Alan's straightforward approach. 25 years isn't something you just set aside, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for something new. The real estate business continued to thrive as Martha built her reputation for honesty and careful attention to clients' needs. By October, she had become one of the agency's top-performing agents, specializing in helping families find homes that truly suited their specific situations, rather than pushing for the highest possible sale. "You have a gift for matching people with the right space," Diane told her during their quarterly review. "Clients trust your judgment because they can tell you're thinking about their happiness, not just your commission." "That's the teacher in me," Martha explained. "I spent decades learning to see what each student actually needed, not just what the curriculum dictated." As the holidays approached, Martha faced a new challenge, navigating family traditions that had always been built around the intact family unit. Emma would be home for just 3 days at Thanksgiving, needing to return to Boston for end-of-semester responsibilities. Michael had announced he would be spending the holiday with Jacob and Vanessa in Seattle, his first visit to their new home. "You should come too, Mom," he'd suggested awkwardly during a phone call. "Dad said you're welcome. For dinner, I mean." The invitation, well-intentioned but painfully uncomfortable, had made Martha wince. "That's very kind of him," she'd replied carefully, "but I have plans with Emma already. She's only here for a short time." In truth, Martha had been dreading the holiday. Her first Thanksgiving without either child at home seemed a milestone of her altered life that she wasn't quite ready to face. When Alan tentatively suggested they combine their celebrations, his own plans had consisted of volunteer work at a community dinner followed by a solitary evening. Martha surprised herself by immediately agreeing. "Sophie won't be home either," he explained. She's spending the break with her boyfriend's family in Colorado. It seems silly for us to be alone in separate houses. And so Thanksgiving found them cooking together in Martha's kitchen, the familiar space filling with new aromas as Alan contributed his family's traditional oyster stuffing and Martha prepared her mother's cranberry orange relish. Emma arrived from the airport just as the turkey emerged from the oven, her presence bringing a youthful energy to the gathering. "So this is the famous Martin family oyster stuffing," Emma declared, helping herself to a generous portion. "Sophie told me about this when we were texting. She said it was life-changing." "You've been texting with Sophie?" Alan asked, surprise evident in his voice. Emma nodded, mouth full. "Since summer. We've been comparing notes on our respective environmental science programs. She's doing amazing work with forest succession models." Martha exchanged a glance with Alan, both of them quietly processing this unexpected connection between their children, a link formed independently of their relationship, yet somehow validating it. The meal was relaxed and joyful, conversation flowing easily as Emma regaled them with stories from her teaching experiences and research progress. When Alan's phone rang during dessert, Sophie's face appeared on the screen, calling to wish him a happy holiday. "Want to say hi to some people?" he asked her, then turned the phone to include Martha and Emma in the frame. "We're having dinner together." Sophie's initial surprise gave way to warm greetings. "Dad never makes the oyster stuffing for just himself," she told Martha. "That means you're special." After Emma left to catch her return flight, hugging both Martha and Alan fiercely before departure, they settled on the couch with glasses of wine, the house settling into evening quiet around them. "That went better than I expected," Martha admitted. "I was worried it might feel wrong somehow, changing the holiday pattern." "Maybe that's the trick," Alan suggested, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. "Not trying to replicate the old traditions exactly, but creating space for new ones alongside them." Martha leaned into his embrace, considering his words. "It's like renovating a house instead of demolishing it," she mused. "You keep the foundation and the elements that still work, but you update the parts that don't serve anymore." "Exactly," Alan agreed. "And sometimes the renovation turns out better than the original design." Christmas brought its own challenges and joys. Both children would be home, necessitating careful scheduling to accommodate Jacob's desire to see them as well. Martha found herself in the unaccustomed position of not being the primary holiday coordinator, a role she had filled without question during the marriage. "We'll do Christmas Eve with you and Christmas Day with Dad," Michael proposed during a family video call in early December, his practical nature asserting itself. "That way nobody has to drive between houses on the actual holiday." Emma nodded agreement. "And Alan is welcome at our Christmas Eve, right, Mom?" Sophie mentioned she might be able to come too, if her flight gets in on time. Martha felt a rush of gratitude for her children's efforts to include Alan and acknowledge the evolving family configuration. "Of course he's welcome," she assured them. "And Sophie too." The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of professional and personal activity. The real estate market slowed seasonally, but Martha still had several pending sales to shepherd toward closing before year's end. She and Alan attended holiday concerts, a charity gala where his firm was being recognized for its community contributions, and a series of gatherings with friends from their respective circles. On the weekend before Christmas, they drove to a tree farm in the foothills, tramping through light snow to select the perfect Douglas fir for Martha's living room. The familiar ritual, one she had shared with Jacob and the children for decades, felt both poignant and refreshing with Alan beside her, his expertise in forest management adding a new dimension as he explained sustainable harvesting practices between playful snowball tosses. Later, decorating the tree in Martha's living room, they shared stories of holidays past. The year Sophie had insisted on making all the ornaments herself from pine cones and glitter, resulting in a spectacularly messy but beloved tree. The Christmas when Emma, at age 7, had attempted to catch Santa by rigging an elaborate alarm system of jingle bells on the staircase. Jacob was so impressed with her engineering skills that he couldn't even be mad about being woken at 3 a.m., Martha recalled, carefully hanging a hand-painted ceramic star that Michael had made in 5th grade. Alan passed her a delicate glass ball filled with tiny pine branches, a recent purchase they'd made together at a local artisan's shop. "New memories alongside the old ones," he said simply. Christmas Eve brought swirling snow and a gathering that felt both improvised and somehow right. Martha and Alan in the kitchen preparing roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, Michael setting the dining table with careful precision, Emma and Sophie engaged in animated conversation about ecological field research methods, their academic connection having blossomed into genuine friendship. After dinner, they followed Martha's family tradition of opening one gift each before midnight. Michael received a vintage engineering textbook from Alan, a thoughtful find from a specialized bookstore that clearly impressed him. Emma unwrapped hiking boots specially designed for rainforest conditions from Martha, preparation for her next research expedition. Sophie's gift from Martha, a handcrafted journal with pressed botanical specimens embedded in the handmade paper, brought tears to the young woman's eyes. "This is so perfect," she whispered, running her fingers over the textured cover. "How did you know?" "Your dad might have mentioned your interest in botanical illustration," Martha admitted with a smile. "And I remembered your detailed nature drawings from 3rd grade." The evening concluded with mugs of hot chocolate spiked with peppermint schnapps, non-alcoholic for Michael, who was driving later, and Emma's enthusiastic leadership of Carol singing around the piano, an instrument that had stood largely unused since she'd left for college. As midnight approached, Michael hugged Martha goodbye, heading to his father's house where he would spend the night before Christmas morning festivities. Sophie departed with him, planning to visit friends from high school before returning to her mother's home the following afternoon. In the sudden quiet after their departure, Martha, Alan and Emma sat by the fire, watching snow continue to fall beyond the windows. "That was really nice, Mom," Emma said sincerely, curled up in her favorite corner of the sofa. "Different, but nice." Alan squeezed Martha's hand gently, the gesture speaking volumes about his understanding of the emotional complexity of the evening for her. Joy mingled with awareness of what had changed, what had been lost alongside what had been gained. Later, after Emma had gone to bed and Alan was preparing to drive home through the snow, he lingered in Martha's front hallway, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low to avoid disturbing Emma upstairs. "Maybe we should consider a more permanent arrangement." Martha's heart quickened. "What kind of arrangement?" "The living together kind," he clarified. "Not necessarily right away, but it's something I've been considering. My house is bigger, but yours has more character. Or we could look for something entirely new, something that would be ours together." The proposal hung between them, momentous yet somehow natural, the logical progression of the relationship they'd been building with such careful intention. "Can I think about it?" Martha asked, not because she was uncertain about her feelings for Alan, but because the prospect of such a significant change required processing. "Of course," he replied immediately. "There's no rush. I just wanted you to know where my thoughts are heading." He kissed her goodbye, a lingering connection that carried promises for the future, then disappeared into the swirling snow toward his car. Martha locked the door behind him, then stood in her living room taking in the scene, the Christmas tree they had decorated together, the empty mugs from their hot chocolate, the sheet music still open on the piano. Her home had absorbed new memories tonight, the space accommodating an evolved version of family that she couldn't have imagined a year ago. The next morning brought Emma bouncing into her room at an hour reminiscent of Christmas mornings from decades past, bearing coffee and childlike excitement about the gifts waiting downstairs. They spent the morning in pajamas, opening presents and video calling Michael at Jacob's house, where he proudly displayed the new technical drawing set Martha had sent. Jacob appeared briefly in the background of the call, offering awkward holiday greetings before disappearing to what Emma later explained was a kitchen crisis involving Vanessa's experimental approach to turkey preparation. "Apparently it involves a blowtorch and several non-traditional spices," Emma reported, rolling her eyes affectionately. Dad looked simultaneously terrified and impressed. Martha found herself smiling at the image, able to picture Jacob's expression perfectly. The mixture of anxiety and admiration he always displayed when someone demonstrated skills outside his expertise. The memory brought warmth rather than pain, a sign of healing she hadn't anticipated. Later that afternoon, as they prepared a simple Christmas dinner for two, Emma broached the subject Martha had been contemplating since Alan's departure the night before. "So," Emma said casually, slicing potatoes for roasting, "Alan mentioned something about possibly living together?" Martha looked up from the chicken she was seasoning. He told you that? Not directly, Emma admitted. But this morning when he texted to wish me Merry Christmas, he mentioned hoping we could all find a place that felt like home together next year. I can read between the lines. Martha set down the rosemary sprig she'd been about to tuck under the chicken's skin. He brought it up last night. Asked me to think about it. Emma's hand stilled on the potatoes. And? What are you thinking? Martha considered the question, appreciating her daughter's directness. I'm thinking it makes sense in many ways. We enjoy being together. Neither of us wants to remarry, but companionship is important. But, Emma prompted, resuming her slicing. But this house holds 25 years of memories. It's where you and Michael grew up. Martha gestured around the kitchen where Emma had taken her first steps, where Michael had practiced endless science fair presentations. I'm not sure I'm ready to let that go. Emma leaned against the counter, studying her mother with surprising maturity. Mom, Michael and I don't live here anymore. We come back to visit you, not the physical house. I know that logically, but… And you've already transformed this place, Emma continued. Remember how it looked when Dad lived here? All those law books everywhere. His terrible leather recliner in the living room. Martha laughed despite herself. That chair was an abomination. Exactly. And now the house reflects you. Your books, your garden plans on the walls, your pottery collection. You've already rewritten this space once. Martha considered her daughter's words as she arranged the chicken in the roasting pan. I suppose you're right. Besides, Emma added, tossing potato slices into a bowl with olive oil and herbs, Alan's house has that amazing view. And that deck. Think of the sunset dinners you could have. Is that your vote for his place over mine? Martha asked, amused by Emma's enthusiasm. I'm just saying consider all options before nostalgia makes the decision. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the kitchen filling with savory aromas. What about Michael? Martha finally asked. He seemed to be warming up to Alan at Christmas Eve, but he's still reserved. Emma pursed her lips thoughtfully. Michael's complicated. He takes Dad's side without realizing it sometimes. But last night when we were getting ready to leave, he told me he thought Alan treated you with more respect than Dad ever did. Martha nearly dropped the salt cellar she was holding. He said that. He observes everything, you know that. Always has. Emma placed the potatoes in the oven beside the chicken. Give him time. He's still sorting through his feelings about Dad's choices. In January, with the children back at their respective schools and winter settling heavily over the town, Martha found herself increasingly drawn to the idea of sharing daily life with Alan. Their current pattern of separate homes with frequent visits and occasional overnights had begun to feel unnecessarily complicated. One snowy afternoon, as they sat in his living room watching a documentary about coral reefs, Martha broached the subject. I've been thinking about your suggestion, she said during a pause between episodes, about living together. Alan muted the television, turning to give her his full attention. And I think I'd like to try. But I have some concerns. Of course you do, he replied with the gentle teasing that had become familiar between them. You wouldn't be Martha without a carefully considered list of considerations. She bumped his shoulder playfully. I'm serious. I know, he said, taking her hand. Tell me. Martha took a deep breath. First, I'm not ready to sell my house. Not yet. Maybe we could rent it out initially. Alan nodded. Reasonable. What else? I'd like us to be clear about finances. Separate accounts for personal expenses, joint for household costs. That makes sense, he agreed. I'd suggest we each contribute proportionally based on our incomes. Martha smiled, appreciating his immediate understanding. And lastly, I think we should have a trial period. 6 months where we live together but maintain the rental option on my house as a safety net. Alan considered this, his expression thoughtful. Would you feel comfortable moving here? I know it's further from town than you're used to. Actually, I love it here, Martha admitted. The space, the light, the view. But I'd want some areas that feel like mine. Your house is very… Our house, he corrected gently. And we could renovate the guest suite into a proper office for you. Maybe convert part of the lower level into a studio space for your pottery. Martha felt a flutter of excitement at the possibilities. You'd be willing to change things? Martha, Alan said seriously, I've lived alone in this big house for 8 years. Nothing would make me happier than seeing it transformed by your presence. By early February, they had developed a plan. Martha would move into Alan's house gradually, bringing essential items first while preparing her house for potential renters. Alan had already begun sketching designs for renovating the underutilized spaces to better accommodate Martha's needs. Michael responded to the news with characteristic reserve, asking practical questions about the financial arrangements and offering to help with the moving logistics during his spring break. Emma was more effusive, immediately suggesting furniture placements and color schemes that would blend Martha's aesthetic with Alan's more minimalist approach. Jacob's reaction, when Martha informed him as a courtesy, was unexpected. "So soon?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of genuine surprise over the phone. "It's only been, 9 months since you started seeing him?" "Almost a year," Martha corrected, keeping her tone neutral. "And we're not rushing into anything. We're both in our 50s, Jacob. We know what we want." "Of course," he said quickly. "I just want to make sure you're being careful." Martha bit back the urge to remind him that he had moved in with Vanessa within weeks of leaving their marriage. "I appreciate your concern," she said instead, "but I'm quite capable of making good decisions for myself." The conversation left her unsettled, not because Jacob's opinion mattered to her romantic choices, but because his implicit suggestion that she might be acting impulsively highlighted her own lingering insecurities. Was she moving too quickly? Was this decision driven by fear of being alone rather than genuine compatibility with Alan? She brought these doubts to Diane during their next lunch meeting. "Am I making a mistake?" she asked her friend directly. "Is this too soon?" Diane considered the question seriously, stirring her soup. "Do you remember what you told me last spring when you were worried about dating again?" Martha shook her head. "You said, 'I've spent 25 years navigating life with the wrong partner. I think I've earned the right to recognize the right one when he comes along.'" Diane reached across the table to squeeze Martha's hand. "You were right then and you're right now. You know the difference between infatuation and genuine compatibility." By late March, Martha had moved most of her essential belongings into Alan's house. Her pottery will occupy a bright corner of the newly renovated lower level, surrounded by shelves he had built to her specifications for glazes and tools. Her books filled the previously sparse bookshelves in what was now their shared living room, and her favorite armchair sat opposite his by the fireplace. The transition wasn't without challenges. Alan's methodical approach to household organization sometimes clashed with Martha's more intuitive system. They discovered unexpected points of friction: his preference for absolute quiet in the mornings versus her habit of playing public radio while preparing breakfast, her tendency to leave multiple projects in various stages of completion around the house versus his desire for spaces to be returned to order when not in use. But they approached these discoveries with humor and flexibility, each making small adjustments that acknowledged the other's needs without demanding fundamental personality changes. In April, just as the rental agreement for Martha's house was being finalized with the young professor and his family, Michael arrived for a weekend visit. He moved through the transformed spaces of Alan's, now Martha and Alan's, home with careful attention, noting the changes with an engineer's precision. "You've really made it work," he observed as they stood on the deck after dinner, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. "It feels like both of you now." Martha felt a surge of emotion at her son's approval. "It does, doesn't it? I was worried it would always feel like I was just visiting." Michael was quiet for a moment. "You know, I was angry at Dad for a long time," he said finally. "Not just for leaving, but for how he did it, making everyone else adjust to his decisions without real consideration for the impact." Martha waited, sensing he needed to continue without interruption. "But seeing you now, how you and Alan have built this together, I think I understand better. Dad couldn't have that with you because he wasn't willing to make space, to compromise, to rebuild." Michael turned to her with unexpected emotion in his eyes. "You deserve someone who sees your worth, Mom. I'm glad you found that." Martha pulled her son into a fierce hug, momentarily unable to speak. When she finally stepped back, she simply said, "Thank you." That night, lying beside Alan in what now felt truly like their bedroom, Martha reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the shattered certainties of her marriage to this new, carefully constructed life. "I think we're going to make it," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Alan, half asleep, pulled her closer. "Did you ever really doubt it?" "Not doubt exactly," Martha replied, settling against his warmth. "More like, wonder at how life unfolds in unexpected patterns." "The best engineering happens when you have to work around obstacles," Alan murmured. "Makes for more interesting solutions." Martha smiled in the darkness, thinking of the obstacles they had navigated, past relationships, adult children, established habits, and the complicated logistics of merging two complete lives. The result wasn't what she had planned for herself all those years ago when she had stood beside Jacob in a white dress, imagining their future together. It was, in many ways, better, richer for being chosen with full awareness, stronger for being built on the foundation of who they had become rather than who they had been. "I love you," she said simply, the words still new enough between them to carry weight. "I love you too," Alan replied, his voice certain even on the edge of sleep. "Welcome home, Martha." Progress, she thought again as she drifted toward sleep. Not linear, not always recognizable in the moment, but progress nonetheless.